Good morning, everyone. How are you all? I heard that this third plenary session will be the best in the conference. That's what I've been told, at least. But don't quote me on this one, yeah? All right, so this is my third international conference and international interfaith gathering, which I have attended in the past 2 weeks. I was at the G20 Interfaith Forum in Tokyo, and I was also at the conference in Brussels just last week, just before coming down here, on conference on human dignity and religions with the EU and the EU Special Envoy on freedom of religion and belief. And one of the things that came out of there was this notion of religious climate change. So apparently we are not just confronting the problems of ecological crisis and climate change, but there is this sense that there is a change in the religious climate around the world with the religious populism, nationalism, and conservatism. So we discussed yesterday about faith and identity. And in this third plenary session, we'll be dealing with the issue of cohesion and how we come together as a society. And I remember during the 1980s, and I was doing my secondary school then in London, Margaret Thatcher had once said, there is no such thing as societies. There are only men, women, and then families. So I think we've come a long way from really understanding, reality. That there is, after all, this so-called society, and that we are all having this problem of how to build a cohesive society. And so with us today, we have 4 distinguished speakers who will each present their thoughts, insights, and experiences on how they deal with cohesion in their societies and how education and interfaith activities and initiatives are being dealt with in different countries and contexts. So first, I would like to invite Dr. Nuaimi to give your thoughts and insights for 10 minutes.
First, I'd like to thank our host, Singapore, the government, the people, the teams who are working with us here for hosting such an event and for the great hospitality that they provided for all of us. Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, I am an academician by training, but I am here not to deliver an academic speech. I prefer to talk to you through my personal experience, bringing the way that my country came all the way since independence till now, and sharing with you our hopes, our dreams, and also the challenges that we face, not as Arab or as UAE or as Muslim, but as human being. We belong to a region that suffer a lot. Suffer because of wars based on religion, religious beliefs, suffers because of those who wanted to divide us. We suffer a lot because our religion, Islam, was hijacked and used as an ideology, not only to fight others and make them suffer, but also we were the most who suffers because of what they did to us. We in the UAE, we are a young country. Before, in 1971, our country got independence. We were a small country. We had nothing at that time. Even, we lived in houses. Myself, I am part of a generation that lived in a house. We didn't have electricity. We didn't have water. We came all the way as Singaporean did. There is so many things that we do share with Singapore. in the challenges and also the threats that we face. After all this, we came to a conclusion that we, at the end, we are part of a world. The region that I came from suffer a lot because some of us thought that we should protect ourselves from others. We should be careful in opening our minds and hearts for others. Some of us thought that our religion asks us to downgrade others and look at us as superior and try to force our belief and ask others to follow us. This is what the region is suffering. But the good thing, the UAE leadership had a vision where they saw that we can develop a nation without being part of the world, being part of the humanity, looking at the common values that we share with others, looking at the big picture that Islam, our religion, is a religion of peace and love for all humanity, not only for Muslims. Everybody knows that all nations now are seeking security, stability, and prosperity. But there is a fact that we have to look at it. No one nation will enjoy security, stability, and prosperity while their neighbors are suffering. We see this. You will be able to create walls for a certain period. But the era that we are living in is an era of building bridges, not walls. Now, we see that people are talking about globalism, and they focus on the movement of goods. They focus on globalism as a tool for business and finance. But what we need more is globalism in things that will bring us together, in the value that we share together as human beings. There is others who their priority is to divide us, because they see that if they divide us, we will be weak and they will be able to control us. Our strength is in coming together. The theme of this conference is very important. But the more important things that we have to look at is what's next. What kind of initiatives and programs that will be able to take out of this conference, take it to our community, to our family, to we as individuals, what we will take from this. Ladies and gentlemen, what we are talking about here is a noble cause for all of us, for humanity. We need to integrate this in our personal agenda, not only in our national agenda. We need champions who will take the lead in bringing us together as a humanity, who are willing to come forward and take the risk and speak loudly that we as human beings, we need to live together. We all will seek security, stability, prosperity for all human beings. This is what we need, and we need champions to do so, to lead in that. especially the religious leaders. In this region and in my region, religion are used to divide us. Many of us suffered because some of the religious leaders, they didn't take their responsibility. They didn't bear the responsibility and came forward and speak loudly, representing the good thing in all religion that will bring us as human beings. It's very important that we focus on religion as a tool to bring us together, not to divide us. And this is why we need initiatives and programs that will be, a model and a call for the new generation that we, regardless of our religion, we can live together. We can fight the devil together. We can protect the common value that we share as human beings together. And we can create prosperity for all human beings. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is my honor to be invited to join this important and meaningful conference. As a teacher and scholar of religious studies, I would like to share my view on whether and how religious education may contribute to the formation of cohesive societies. I prepare a one-page PPT. Yes, that is. When we hear the term religious education, some of us may have the impression that it is something taking place in a religious place, such as a mosque, Buddhist temple, or Christian church. But the religious education I refer to is part of the formal education taking place in educational institutions, such as secondary school and universities. In the Western world, religious education started first with an approach which focusing on the Christian religion in terms of contents and enhancing the students' commitment to Christianity as the goal of religious education. It may either ignore other religions or interpreting them from the perspective of Christianity. Scholars usually call this model mono-religious education. Due to the process of secularization and pluralization, the dominance of this model in the Western world met serious challenges and underwent some dramatic changes in the last few decades. Since the 1970s, many scholars advocated for a new model of multi-religious education as a better alternative. The practice of this multi-religious education does not assume any religious identity from the teacher or students. It assumes that if the teacher can maintain a neutral position among the religions when conveying some objective knowledge of different religions, the students will become open to various religions and the values of religious pluralism, which may benefit the formation of a religiously pluralistic and yet cohesive society. The limitation of this model is that since the religious identity of the teacher or students does not play any positive role in the educational process, in return, the religious commitment of the student is not expected to be enhanced. Since the 1990s, some scholars attempt to develop another model called interreligious education, which regards religious education as a platform for interreligious dialogue. Its educational goals can be summarized in three aspects. In terms of knowledge, interreligious education aims at helping students participate in their religious heritage and foster mutual understanding among people of different religious traditions through sharing knowledge of different religious traditions to and among the students. It not only helps students understand the culture of their own community, but also opens their eyes to the richness of the spiritual civilization of the human world. Number two, in terms of skills, interreligious education aims at cultivating students' ability to dialogue with persons of different religions, cultural and political backgrounds. Students will learn not only how to express themselves, but also how to listen to others and have in-depth understanding of the others. By understanding different religious traditions, students will learn how to reflect upon the traditions inherited by themselves and the others, and even to interpret them faithfully and creatively, relating them to their daily lives. The third aspect is the aptitude. Interreligious education helps students to raise their intercultural awareness and cultivate their appreciation of religious diversity. It also helps students realize the fact that they always see things from a particular tradition or in a particular position. This contributes to the formation of a humble and open-minded attitude towards the others. While retaining their own religious and cultural identification, they are also able to stay open to other traditions. In comparison with mono-religious education and multi-religious education, interreligious education is more comprehensive and can maintain a balance between identification with a particular religion and openness to other religions. Then I would like to say a few words about the practice of interreligious education in Hong Kong. I would like to share the experience of my university first. When I was a student at the Chinese University of Hong Kong studying religious studies, I can tell you the secret that at that time, most of the courses are about Christianity and mainly Protestant. And there are a few courses about other religions, and all of them are taught by just one teacher who is a Catholic. So you can imagine how mono-religious education we practiced at that time. I'm talking about 30 years ago. But now, looking into the curriculum, we have more courses and more professors on other religions, Taoism, Buddhism, Islam, etc., etc. And in collaboration with many religious organizations from the Buddhist, Taoist, Catholic, Islam, Hinduism, etc., we established many religious study centers, these are research centers, and also some professorship in this area. And we developed many courses which adopt inter-religious approach to some important issues related to our daily life, say, related to environmental ethics, gender issues, some contemporary social and ethical issues, such as peace building, and our daily life about, say, life and death in different religions. So we shift to an interreligious education model. Perhaps I would like to say more about the interreligious education in Hong Kong, especially in the secondary schools. In Hong Kong, we have many schools established by various religions. Of course, the Buddhist school will teach Buddhism in their religious education, and the Catholic will teach Catholicism in their religious education. So it's basically mono-religious education model. But in 2001, the government proposed a new curriculum called the Ethics and Religious Studies. And the curriculum, this curriculum reform focused on the senior forms from Form 4 to Form 6 and leaves the mono-religious education from Form 1 to Form 3 untouched. I think that is a very wise political compromise. The proposed new curriculum focuses more on the spiritual growth and the moral growth and also the spiritual development of the student, and aims to address more explicitly the cultural, political, and context of pluralistic Hong Kong. The aims of this curriculum is that it lists 4 aims. Number 1, acquire knowledge of the religion they study of other major religions in Hong Kong. Number 2, make rational and informed judgments about religious and moral issues. Yeah, that is to help the student to develop these attributes. And number 3 is to enhance the student's spiritual, moral, and social development. And number 4, to develop a positive attitude towards people and respect their beliefs. And explain the rationale in this way. This curriculum enables students to examine ways in which moral and religious questions will be formulated and reflected upon through history and across the globe. Well, perhaps I should cut it short. I would like to say how my department helped the religious education in Hong Kong, especially in the secondary sector. We organized many activities. Yeah, for example, visiting different religious sites, bringing Buddhist students to mosques, etc., and to interview the religious leaders, let them know how the religious leaders or religious celebrities, how they see different issues, environmental issues, gender issues, and so some current affairs. And also, they will interview some ethnic minority groups, for example, in South Asia, talking about their concerns, their daily life, jobs, housing, property, discrimination, language barrier, etc., etc. And we find that all these initiatives can help the student to understand more their communities. They understand that these ethnic minority groups is also part of our community. We need to care about them, have more understanding about them. And it's my opinion that perhaps in Singapore, we are more pluralistic. And also the Singapore government is more proactive in enhancing the cultural harmony. It's my expectation that perhaps Singapore can work out a better model in inter-religious education and enhance our social cohesion. Thank you.
Firstly, thank you to RSIS and the MCCY and the Singaporean government for organizing this very impressive and inspiring event. And thank you, Dickie, for coordinating our panel. I'm very honored to be speaking here today with all of these esteemed scholars and practitioners. So, as many speakers have alluded to already, I think that what we are currently witnessing is not a clash between civilizations, but a clash within civilizations, between those with more inclusive and those with more exclusive attitudes. So this slide that I'm showing is from my own home context of Australia, where you can really see these two movements in place. The first is a picture of a pro-diversity rally, and the second is an image taken from the Cronulla riots in Sydney. And I think this latter exclusivity, unfortunately, is intensifying in our current era. And it's evident in the rise of populism and hateful and violent extremism, as we witnessed tragically in the recent horrific events in Christchurch, New Zealand, and across Sri Lanka. So, a theoretical frame that I and my colleagues have found quite useful to understand this current phenomena is seeing this as a clash between cosmopolitan and anti-cosmopolitan actors. So briefly, cosmopolitans welcome cultural and religious diversity, including non-religious worldviews, as long as they do not impinge upon the rights of others. They value gender, sexuality, and multi-species diversity and rights alongside religious rights, and do not believe that religious rights should override the rights of other groups and species. They are concerned about rising economic inequalities and environmental degradation caused by global capitalism. And they propose that these concerns be addressed through holistic measures that recognize the interconnectedness and interdependency of all life and an ethic of care that encompasses the entire life world. By contrast, anti-cosmopolitans feel their entitlements to be threatened by processes of globalization. They're clinging to narrow nationalism as an ideology to avoid and address change. They are sometimes, but certainly not always, religiously conservative, and they fear diversity and resist respect for gender, sexuality, and multi-species diversities, and can be inspired at times by literal and selective readings of religious texts. Theirs is a dominionist worldview, whereby religious rights often triumph over other rights, and religious freedom is increasingly evoked to deny the rights of others. Anti-cosmopolitanism can lead to anti-cosmopolitan terror. So this rise of anti-cosmopolitanism and populism has resulted in recent calls for action, new frameworks of collective action by scholars and activists such as Judith Butler and Naomi Klein to counter this politics of fear through strengthening alliances and proposing this ethics of care similar to the Charter of Compassion that Karen Armstrong described yesterday. So my argument, and based on my prior research, is that these newer social movements can perhaps learn some valuable lessons from the interfaith movement. This slide, also from Australia, is a picture of an interfaith youth movement called Interaction that was established in Melbourne in 2009, just before the Parliament of World's Religions, and very much inspired by Ibu Patel's Interfaith Youth Corps. So my research on the interfaith movement, the global interfaith movement, multi-faith movement, has identified 4 principal aims. Firstly, developing understanding of diverse faiths and the nature of reality. And as Karen mentioned yesterday, this transcendent dimension is still important. And again, as Paul mentioned, so is the dimension of religious literacy implicit in this first aim. The multi-faith movement has also always challenged exclusivity and normalized pluralism. It has and continues to address global risks and injustices by creating multi-actor peace-building networks for common security. And these networks include not just religious community leaders, but also state actors, academics, media, and business at times. So most recently, what I'm advocating and proposing to counter anti-cosmopolitanism and also to counter and prevent violent extremism is a critical religious pluralism. And this draws on critical theory that's focused on emancipation and liberation from conditions that enslave us, and namely the conditions of inequality, again, that were discussed in detail yesterday. It acknowledges religion's role in both creating and ameliorating direct and structural violence, the ambivalence of the sacred. And critical religious pluralism respects religious diversity, but is also very much rights-based, focused on human and multi-species rights, and is inherently cosmopolitan. It observes the no harm principle and an ethics of care and compassion. And in this way, it is genuinely peace-building and can contribute to C or PVE strategies, particularly through encouraging community engagement and education, to counter ignorance and exclusivity, and to repair, or at least to help navigate, the potholes and challenges that life presents us with, and that stresses our common humanity and commitment to the common good. Thank you.
Good morning. First of all, let me express my gratitude to the organizers for extending the invitation to me to participate in this panel and plenary. In 2014, the Pew Research Center rated Singapore with the highest score in its Religious Diversity Index. And this could very easily have worked against us being a cohesive society, the fact that we are so religiously diverse. But over the years, we have been able to live in harmony with people of different races and religions. Now, what factors have contributed to our reasonable success as being a cohesive society, and what are the challenges we face? That has the task that has been assigned to me. And I will attempt to give a personal perspective on these 2 points. But I must say that I speak from a personal perspective. My views do not represent the Methodist Church in Singapore, nor can I say that I'm speaking for the Presidential Council on Religious Harmony, with which I'm identified at this conference. And to help us take away something from what I'm going to say, I will use the acronym GRIP. GRIP. G is for government. Our government is the prime mover in initiating efforts towards religious harmony and social cohesion. Our founding fathers had the foresight to enact various legislations to draw the boundaries of racial and religious interactions, as well as to formulate policies and initiate programs. Our government is secular, and so has to be seen to be fair in umpiring the differences and tensions that may arise from the various religious groups. And as preventive step, the government also has initiated and promoted interaction among the various communities. But subtle differences and tensions do arise from time to time. And in my knowledge and observation, these have always been handled with a gentle touch. But as a last resort, government is, in a manner of speaking, the enforcer of prosecuting those who will not work with and live within the given framework. What are the challenges in this area? Governments change. And by change, I mean not just the party in power, but also the individuals and leadership team in power. And the government may not change, the party may not change, but the policies might change. And this is something only to be seen in the future. In some parts of the world, to win votes, parties have resorted to religion and race-based politics. In Singapore, we have legislations to discourage that, but we have not been severely tested, so to give us a case by which to apply and study them. Secondly, R is for relationship. At the initiative of the government in the early days, there is now a close working relationship between government ministers, decision makers, and key religious and community leaders. And there are regular and informal gatherings where such interactions take place. And we are just a phone call away from each other. Such gatherings also facilitate personal relationship among key religious leaders, and we are also just a phone call away to talk to each other, to ease tensions, and to arrange face-to-face meetings. We have formal structures like the interracial and religious confidence circles in every constituency to promote racial and religious harmony. And the IRCCs are also harnessed to respond to any tensions that may arise in the community level to help resolve these issues. Now, what are the challenges in this area? One is cascading this kind of relationship to the grassroots, the neighbor next door, is continual work. You know, public events and activities attract those who are already converted to the goal of social harmony or close to it. But there are those who will only give lip service and may react negatively at the gut level when they are affected personally. Second, passing these harmonious relationships, these personal relationships amongst the key leaders to the next generation is not a given. It is a never-ending process. A different generation may look at the whole arrangement from a very different perspective, as they may receive influence and input from elsewhere. GRI is for informed. People at all levels are being informed, from national education in schools to public education campaigns. And we are informed about the faith and practices of other religions, which may help to correct some misconceptions we have. And government agencies and other organizations are kept informed about what is happening elsewhere in the world. And information is relayed to educate us regarding what may threaten our social harmony. But what are the challenges in this area? First, challenge is to ensure that the information is authentic from authoritative sources. And this is a challenge because we may not be able to know everything that circulates digitally. Who knows what kind of technology may develop that will keep making ourselves informed more challenging. And second, the speed at which we are able to detect misinformation and correct such views is critical, because just a little spark can start a big fire. Finally, P. P is for prayer. And from two perspectives. From a religious perspective, the Bible urges Christians to pray for all people, for all who are in high authority, that we may lead a peaceful and quiet, godly and dignified life. With racial and religious tensions sometimes being the most intractable, we need all the help we can get for the Almighty. And personally, over the 5 decades that I've been around, I've heard of many groups in my faith community praying for Singapore. And I believe you will find similar examples in other communities as well, other faith communities as well. You know, we pray when we are in trouble. But we must also pray so that we do not get into trouble. Or when the trouble comes, we are better prepared to face them. But second, prayer from a socialization perspective. You know, words spoken in sacred contexts, like prayers, in the presence of the faithful, have the power to influence their subsequent thoughts and actions. Religious words hold sway among the faithful, but more so when they are addressed to the Almighty. And when the followers hear this often and subsequently pray the same themselves, they shape community consciousness. And at times, it becomes an accepted value in the community. And so the challenge in this area is that theology informs and shapes our prayers. Theology literally means words we use to talk about our understanding of God. And certain words creeping into our theology may lead to a malformation of our understanding of God, and hence distort not just our prayers, but also misdirect our consciousness towards ill will against our fellow human beings. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, Bishop Wee. We have a number of questions for the speakers, and I would just like to read one and then explain more about where the complexity lies. Is it appropriate / possible to include various religions' basic common education or information in public government schools to educate people on one another's religion? Now, I'd like to sort of bring back the issue which Karen brought up yesterday about transcendence, that we are really facing this crisis of transcendence, and that there is a failure on the part of religion and religious leaders to go beyond the here and now and to go beyond their own tradition, in view of the fact that many religious leaders and religious people believe that their tradition is sufficient. So even the idea of self-sufficiency in the maintenance of one's faith becomes problematic. And so how do we contend with these issues and problems in terms of how we reach out to get people to understand the religious traditions of the others? Can I invite
Sure.
Dr. Naomi first?
Well, first we have to acknowledge that diversity is a fact in all society. All our community are very diverse. So in order to live in peace and harmony, to love each other, to create an environment where everybody will enjoy a lifestyle where they will fulfill their dream, we need to invest in education where we will show the common value that bring us together, that we share as humanity to our kids. There is a saying in the US, don't teach all dogs new tricks. So these values, you have to start with the school system. You have to start from KG, teaching, the new generation, the values that bring them together, that they can live together, the thing that, in common that bring them together is more than the thing that they divide them. And also, you will see in our religion that, we have to respect our differences. It's not only that we admit there is differences. No, we have to respect our differences, and that we have to see that although we have 2 eyes and 2 ears and 1 nose, but we have different colors, different shape. And the differences, these add values to us. So we have to start within the educational system teaching our kids the common value, and also teaching them that the differences that we have is something that we have to respect, and it will add value. You can't, frame everybody as the same in everything. But our differences, I think it's very important to show our kids that we need to be different in some cases.
Thank you. Professor Laipan?
Yes, thank you very much. I think it's very important that we need to convince the government first, the value of interfaith education. We need to convince the government that it's good for the students for their own development, their spiritual development, their moral development, etc., etc. And also, it's good for the society to have this kind of education. I think some secular government prefer not to include religion in the curriculum, but I think that may not be the best strategy or approach, because ignorance is the hotbed for hostility, distrust, etc., etc. It's no good for the cultivation of racial or interreligious harmony. So the best way is not whether, but the real question is how. So I would suggest that we can do it with the government's effort. And also we need to convince the religious community to let them know that it is good for the religious community. That's why our project is called Harmony in Diversity. We have to respect the religious identity of individual religious groups, so that our interfaith education is not a threat, not a challenge to the religious tradition On the contrary, will help them to cultivate an identity of the particular religions and help the our secondary school students to understand the value of various traditions and let them to have an informed choice of the religions. I think that is very important.
Okay, just to complicate matters, Professor Hallerhoff, I mean, this also concerns the capacity and competence of the religious education teachers themselves, right? I mean, if they were supposed to teach the religions of the others as well.
Yeah. I think that is, we have to change our understanding of education. In the past, we adopt a very unilateral approach. The teachers convey certain knowledge to the students. The students are just passive receiver. But for interfaith or interreligious education, we invite the students to contribute to the discussion, to share their knowledge within the classroom, so that in case a student from a, say, Buddhist background, perhaps that student may know some details of Buddhism more than the teachers. Okay, so that we have the chance, let the student to share his understanding or his experience of that religion in the classroom, so that the classroom itself is a platform for sharing, for interreligious dialogue. The teacher is not just, I'm the one who knows everything about religions, I tell you the truth and nothing but the truth. No, the teacher is basically a facilitator to help the student to understand the issues. That is the best way for education. Not a single way from the teacher to the student, but we help the student to discuss, to have dialogue among themselves on various issues. We are not talking about just the objective knowledge, but how they see various ethical issues. I think especially for teenagers, they have a lot of problems for their development, psychologically, spiritually, morally. They have many issues they want to share among themselves with the teachers, so that we need to change our mindset about what education is all about.
Professor Hallerhoff?
Yes, I think this is an excellent question about the secular, if it is taking place in a secular state, whether it's appropriate. And I think my feelings on this is that education about diverse religions and beliefs, or education about diverse worldviews, as we're now calling it in Australia, it really has to be context specific. Every one of our nations has a different relationship between religion and state, and I think we need to be really mindful of that. In Australia, just very recently in my state of Victoria, we have introduced a new program about learning about diverse worldviews and religions, including non-religious worldviews, into the state curriculum. But that only occurred in 2015, because before that, the system, there was so much resistance because it was a secular education system. So I think many states, secular states, are coming to terms with the fact that you can have unbiased and a critical social scientific education about diverse worldviews within secular education systems in order to increase religious literacy. And finally, we've just conducted a major national study on young people and their attitudes to diverse worldviews and religions. And what we've found is that actually students who have taken these programs of diverse religions education, which actually has mainly occurred in religious schools, in Catholic schools, have a much more positive attitude towards religious minorities. So that's a really significant finding in terms of the capacity for these kinds of programs to have a positive role in peace building and social cohesion.
Okay. Bishop Wee?
I'm sure those of us here involved in religious education would already know this, and I'm sure you would have incorporated this into your curriculum of some sort. It's not so much just the information that is communicated in the classroom setting or in whatever teaching environment that you have, because eventually, in the long run, you will need to have that face-to-face encounter, develop a relationship with someone of the other religion or other faith or other race, and build a personal relationship face-to-face. And if you are able to enter into the home of someone of another faith, it's a different, it gives you a different aura of what their life is like. and it gives a greater sense of appreciation about who they are and what their life is like, so that it doesn't become just theory, knowledge, but you put a face to it. You know, that's something I noticed in this conference. You know, our questions come from the Slido, whereas previously you have people standing up, ask questions. I can see your face when you ask a question, but now the questions are faceless. I know it's a practical, effective way to do it with a crowd like this, but it also helps to remove the tension if some questions are hot and difficult to answer, but we miss that face-to-face engagement. Just like, you know, you may have knowledge, but it's different when you have to handle face-to-face encounters.
Can I comment?
Yes, please.
You see, I understand that, you know, the government officials are really worried and concerned about talking about the differences, because they feel that when you come to this area where you talk about the differences within the community, their fear is that these differences might divide the community. And here where we, you know, I think the religious leadership in the community, they have to take the lead and come forward. Unfortunately, we have a bad experience in many places where the religious leaders played a major role in dividing us. So they have to come forward and show a model, you know, that they create new initiatives, programs in the community that will bring us together and send the right message to the government official that we can talk about our differences, we can teach the differences, and assure you that when we talk about differences, that will add value to the community and will bring us together rather than dividing us.
Yes. Well, there certainly is a lot of ignorance and what we call religious illiteracy among members of the society, and including government officials, diplomats, and what have you. And so, obviously, it is important to have, you know, be engaging in difficult conversations with people who have, you know, different views about reality, about social life, about the world. And oftentimes you find that these people are really religious people. I mean, these are people who hold on to their faith traditions and are very, you know, religious in the sense of their ritual practices and their worldviews. And so there's one argument that says that you can hold as extreme views as you like, as long as you don't engage in violence. And hence, this is where, you know, all these programs about countering violent extremism, or CVE, comes into place. But oftentimes I think, like, you know, the difference between somebody who's extreme and violent extremists could be just a kitchen knife or a pressure cooker. So how do we engage people like this? I mean, before they even become extremists? Professor Laipan?
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, I think we need to distinguish two concepts first. One is the peace building, another is the peacemaking. Peacemaking, that means after some sort of conflict or violence, well, how to achieve some sort of reconciliation among the groups. That is peacemaking. But peace building is it relates to the process before that, how we cultivate a culture of peace and dialogue and so on and so forth. Education relates mainly the latter one, yeah, not the post-conflict situation. Okay, now. In the education, I think we need to in the education we need to help the student to understand. Well, violence cannot solve the problem. It will only escalate the problem. We need to also understand that how the major religious traditions interpret their own traditions. Yeah, even my friends from the Islamic community, they will tell us, look into the people, the Islamic people in Hong Kong. All of them are so peaceful. These represent the real picture of Islam. Those extremists are just a politically motivated interpretation of Islam. They represent the minority view rather than the major view. And sometimes it's a distortion of the meaning of the Quran, etc., etc. Yeah, if we can let the student to understand what is the overall picture of Islam, they will understand that those extremist interpretation of the Quran are not the mainstream. They may be distortion of the meaning of the Quran. Yeah, this can help the students, not only those who are from the Islamic background, but also from other religious background to understand Islam is a peaceful religion. Yeah, it can help to prevent that kind of radical interpretation of Islam.
Yeah. Professor Hallerhoff?
Me? Again, I think it's a very good question. I think I'm part of a countering violent extremism research network at Deakin University in Australia, and I think there is definitely a movement at the moment among scholars and experts to take hateful extremism more seriously, not just focus on violent extremism, and that people who are exhibiting hateful extremism, are also of great risk to society at the moment. I think the other thing is in terms of violence, I think it's useful again to draw on peace theory here and expand our concept of violence beyond simply direct violence, such as war or terrorism, but more structural violence. What are the underlying inequalities in our system that can then render people more vulnerable to extremism? So I think the type of education and the type of strategies, multi-faith initiatives, things that we're talking about here are sort of at what we would describe at the broader edge of the wedge of preventing violent extremism. There are more things that we as societies can do to hopefully minimize processes of alienation that could then lead to radicalization, or processes of negative stereotyping or Islamophobia. We can counter some of these things through education, given the widespread Islamophobia or anti-Semitism in the media. So I think these are sort of broader peace-building strategies. Once someone is already really on the way to being radicalized and has already been radicalized, I think there are probably other strategies that come into play there. And Christian gave a interesting presentation yesterday, and I think Dr. Ali can speak to that as well. So I think these strategies are complex and diverse, but I think we shouldn't underplay the importance of something like education in PVA.
Bishop Wing?
I think when someone decides to take a path of violence, I think the religion is not to be blamed. I think violence is naturally a part of the human nature. We are prone to violence, and I suppose when the restraints are off, or when the conditions are right, they just surface. And sometimes you just happen to use whatever is nearest to you, whatever is closest to you, as a weapon. I mean, this happens in physical abuse in marriage. It's already there. They come to church. They are very, very, very holy, very nice people, but they beat up one another at home. When the restraints are not there, the conditions are different. So, in the sense, I think when you think about someone whom we label as violent religious extremist, it's not so much the religion. I think there are other causes that we need to examine, economic conditions, family situation. So it's not just zeroing on the religion itself. I think you need to talk to the person as to what may have caused a person to take that route of resorting to violence.
Okay. Here's a very difficult question, but very popular, I guess, among the audience. How do countries with diametrically diverse ethnic and racial groups reconcile when any conflicts are galvanized by foreign superpowers with an inherent geopolitical agenda? In other words, my interpretation of this question is, what if the challenges to our cohesion does not come from within, but from without? Who would like to take the first shot?
Okay. First, I have to comment on the first question.
Sure.
I say two things. You know, in the UAE last February, we had the Pope Francis visit. And we had that conference where we invited different religion leaders from all over the world who come there. I want to say this. One of the Christian leaders, he came to me, he said, Ali, this is the first time we as Christian met in the same place. We need more platform like this, where you will bring everybody together. Let them talk. Let them engage in a dialogue. You know, this will bring us together. This will bridge the gap between us. And I am sure after this, many of us will go and think about, what should I do? You know, this is very important. The second thing, the issue of extremism. You know, since 2014, all these terrorist acts that happened in Barcelona, in France, in London, Berlin, Christchurch, and in Sri Lanka. When you ask all these security agencies, where were you? How come this happened? They said, well, they were not on the watch list as terrorists. They were considered extremists. And this is why, you know, I have to say this. Terrorism is a threat to the world. Terrorism is a threat to humanity. And we will not be able to counter terrorism unless we go to the root and counter extremism. Or, you know, we'll continue facing these challenges. When I come to your question, the UAE is a very diverse community. We as a nation, local, we are Muslim. We are about 15% of the population. We have Christians, we have Jew, we have Buddhist, we have Hindu, we have Sikhs, we have others. And this is very important. We are proud to have this very diverse community. And we consider the diversity that we have as a source of strength, not a source of threat to the community. And we try to create a culture through using our educational system and also the religious leaders, you know, to show that this is what we want, that this is what we're proud of. You know, last year I led the delegation of the UAE representing the UAE in the freedom of religion in the US, the State Department. I led the delegation, but I took with me two priests, the director of the Sikh temple. I wanted to take the director of the Hindu temple, and he was on vacation. He said, Ali, I can't go. I wanted to take one Jew professor from Abu Dhabi, New York University. He was on vacation. When I went there, I was really proud to show the world a very diverse delegation that represent the community in the UAE. We have to be proactive, use the educational system, engage the community leaders and especially the religious leaders. And we have to speak one language. Politician, please stay away of religion, and the religious leaders, please stay away of politics. This is the way to protect our community.
Okay. Can we have other speakers? So how do we contend and confront this external negative influences from other perhaps religious groups or what have you, because as we know, religion is naturally transnational, right?
Perhaps I may refer to the recent incidents in Hong Kong. According to the Chinese interpretation, the demonstration were, so say, inspired by some foreign powers. Okay, of course, I think the Hong Kong people cannot understand why and how. But I think I would like to refer to the role of religion played in these incidents. If you watch some YouTube clips, you will find that some Christians, led by their priests, Catholic fathers, and Protestant minister, they sing a song called "Sing Hallelujah to the Lord" in front of the police. They stand in front of the police and sing this song for hours in order to calm them down and separate the police and the protesters. This creates a very harmonious atmosphere, calm them down, and so say reduce the violence. I think that is one of the example which the religious people can do in a violent, conflicting situation. And for this reason, you will find that the religious leaders in Hong Kong, we have a forum for the 6 religious leaders. They've come together to issue a joint statement to the government to say, well, why don't you stop and think about it again before you really push hardly. And that's why after the, so say, the backdown of the government, the chief executive called a meeting with all these 6 religious leaders and talk to them and say, well, I want to apology to the apology to the Hong Kong people, and will you think that they will accept my apology? And the 6 religious leaders say, well, I think we can, on behalf of the Chinese, the citizen of Hong Kong, well, at least from the religious perspective, our religious leader will say, yes, we accept your apology. I think this kind of a message of forgiveness and reconciliation will help to ease the tension and conflict in this kind of situation. Of course, sometimes we will have a theological issue to be involved. That is whether we should say forgiveness before the apology or after. Sometimes the Christian will say we should have the apology or confession first before we can say the absolution and the forgiveness. Some will say, well, why not say earlier? I think that is a theological question to be debated among the religious leaders. But I think the religions can play a positive role in this kind of conflicting situation.
Professor Hallerhoff?
Well, I think in answer to the question, I think it is inevitable, as Karen Armstrong mentioned yesterday. You know, we live in this globalized world. It is inevitable that we have more awareness now of what's happening in other places. And there is no doubt that foreign policy and people's attitudes towards foreign policy has an impact on local citizens. And again, in our research, we have noted this phenomenon. I think we called it cultural proximity. So if you're part of a diaspora community, you naturally are more concerned with what is happening in your original country of origin and also with other diaspora community that you're part of internationally. So I think the answer to the question is a harder one, because what can we actually do about that? You know, as I said, I think it's very natural that people have concerns when there are global inequalities and violence happening at the state level, you know, in many places. So I think all we can do is continue to work towards and campaign and pray, if we're religious, for more just and peaceful solutions to global problems, to address these underlying grievances.
Bishop Wee?
I'm not so sure who asked the question, but I would suggest you pose the question to the Deputy Prime Minister later. Because from what I have heard, Singapore being a small state, we are under pressure most of the time to belong to one party or something like that, and to, you know, sit in one camp as opposed to another. But here's my 2 cents worth. I think one of the things mentioned earlier in some of the other slides by one of the other presenters is you find allies. You build allies, build relationships of people who may find the same threat facing them. And if you can agree that you both face a bigger threat, whatever differences you have, you may be willing to put them aside in order to deal with this greater threat from a bigger power or a greater problem that face you. That's my 2 cents worth.
There's another question here. How do we move from religious tolerance to acceptance? How do we get to a point where, I've just lost the question. How do we get a point where we stand in solidarity with, move beyond the superficiality of tolerance? And so, as we are probably well aware that there are many interfaith initiatives and activities which are done at the elite level, at the religious leaders level, but yet we are seeing very minimal sort of, the cascading effects and the downstreaming of these, positive sentiments coming out from the leaders. So what can be done so that these interfaith exchanges and initiatives are not seen as mere formalities, and that we are really trying to understand each other and to accept each other as human beings, as religious people with different faith traditions? Yes, please.
Well, in the UAE, 2019 is a year of tolerance. It's declared, each year we choose a theme that we focus on. So in 2019, we focus on tolerance. But, we chose the word tolerance to reflect a word in Arabic called at-tasamuh. We didn't find the right word in English for that. I do understand that, tolerance means that you look at others, and you accept, that's okay. But it's like, looking at them from the top and, accepting what they might be. I think the issue is more than that. We have to accept our differences and respect the differences that we have. What we did in the UAE, we initiate programs related to changing our curriculum, new training for our teachers, the narrative that used in our mosques and worship places are focusing on tolerance. And also the media, we engage the media in many campaigns to show that this is a priority and it's not an option for us to, be a community that engage with others and have tolerance in everything that we have. It's a must. We need it. We need it for our security, for our stability, for the prosperity of the community and the way that we want to take this community in the future forward. So, we have to engage all the stakeholders to promote this issue.
Perhaps we'll start with Bishop Wee.
I think you have to start with tolerance. Tolerance is like just scraping the surface, but if you want some lasting relationship and long-term, you need to dig deeper. But you have to scrape the surface first in order to go deeper. And I think that I go back to what I said earlier. It's difficult to understand to accept from a distance. I think when you accept someone, it has to be personal. When you accept a faith or something, it's personal. So when you want to accept someone who is different, it cannot be just in theory. You have to see a face. You have to shake hands. You have to touch. You have to engage, talk. And so And sometimes in that engagement, in conversation, in discussion, you realize that all those presuppositions you had about this particular person or this particular faith have all been wrong. And you begin to change, and you develop a liking, even though you may see the difference, but you don't just tolerate. You begin to like the person regardless of his faith. So it's basically, that personal level and face-to-face encounter, engagement with people at that personal level.
Professor Harlow?
I do agree with the speakers. I think tolerance is perhaps a starting point, and I tend to prefer the word understanding. We work towards an interreligious understanding, a deeper level of understanding of our commonalities and also our differences. But I maybe want to be a little bit more unsettling here. I think it's also challenging because I think there are some things that perhaps we can't or shouldn't tolerate about one another's differences. And there are going to be things that we at times deeply disagree with. So in the panel yesterday there was mention of gender, things like gender inequality or other forms of structural violence in some religious traditions. They're not really things that I personally wish to tolerate. So how do we have these more difficult conversations within interreligious circles? I think that's an issue, and I think that's why I'm proposing something more like a critical religious pluralism, where we do need something else to help us work together. So whether that's a commitment to rights, or whether that's a commitment to an ethic of care, or a charter of compassion, or a principle of no harm, I think all of us need something kind of more common, that's not just about common humanity, but also about understanding the entire life world, and not to be anthropocentric either, where we really try to live in peace and harmony with one another. And I think in that place, I'm personally more comfortable with a deeper understanding there and deeper respect for diversity.
Yeah, I think one of the important point is how to, moving from tolerance to acceptance is to appreciate the values of the other religions. Yeah, particularly we need to understand that we live in a globalizing world. There are a lot of issues facing humanities in general. Yeah. For example, we have environmental crisis. We have many issues in our society. We need to face them together. Not one religion can solve all this problem. We need to work together with people of other religions in order to face this problem in a more effective way. For example, some Christians find that the Buddhist practice in environmental protection is much better than the Christian practice. They learn it and adopt it. And also, for example, the protest in Hong Kong I mentioned, some Christians sing the song, Sing Hallelujah to the Lord. And some Buddhists thought that, well, why don't we learn from them? We should develop some hymn similar and sing it before in front of the police. Why not? Yeah, if we find that we have some common problems, we share a common futures, so that we need to learn from each other so that we can tackle all these problems in a more effective way. Through this way, we can appreciate the values of other religions. So our attitude is not just tolerance, but acceptance, because we find them indispensable partners to our future.
Okay, before I close this session, I'd just like to ask each panelist to give one final closing statement, just one sentence. No more than one sentence. So think about what you're going to say. Just one sentence.
We have to share the future that we have to create, not just wait until the future will come to us.
Okay, that's a good sentence. Next, please.
Okay, I hope that we can, through dialogue, we strengthen our partnership and form a more cohesive society.
Anna?
I personally feel very moved by this gathering, and it fills me with optimism that we can create these multi-actor peace-building networks locally and globally for our common good and security.
You can see a lot of comas there. Anyways, Bishop Wee.
After all has been said and done, there's a lot more said than done.
Thank you very much, everyone, for your kind attention.